There is an odd paradox in North America right now, one that sits like a stone in the gut. On one side of the border, Americans stare down an affordability crisis that refuses to loosen its grip for about a year now, more than that. Grocery shelves, once symbols of plenty, now stand as silent witnesses to the pain of families counting every dollar with no wiggle room left. The headlines don't soften it either. They drive the point home. Life is getting harder and nobody seems to know how to make it stop. Yet, just a few miles north, Canada is making headlines of a different kind. People are generally happier, GDP is up, government officials are promising new investments, and Ottawa is flexing its muscles on national security and sovereignty. Suddenly, the little brother, the little sibling, in the continental relationship is finding its own footing at the very moment the giant to the south is starting to stumble a little bit. But this is not a story about winner or loser. It's a story about tension between the two, about how two countries bound by history, trade, and something like sibling rivalry, I guess, are being pulled in the opposite directions by the same economic currents. It's about the uneasy feeling that I get reading these stories side by side. Are we watching the start of a new era or just another cycle in the long history of North American friction? To really see it, let's start at the ground level, where the affordability crisis stops being a headline and becomes a daily struggle for basic survival, right? Here is a photo that feels painfully ordinary, right? Jasmine Crow Houston, a community market owner in Atlanta, restocks the shelves. The headline above her basically says it all, right? Americans are feeling the pain of the affordability crisis. There isn't any wiggle room. We see shelves of canned food and spices, a riot of colors, very beautiful, right? But look closely and you can almost sense the anxiety behind the scenes, right? Products carefully arranged, but behind them a whole ecosystem teetering at the edge. Grocery prices, rents, healthcare, everything is edging up. When people say there's no wiggle room, they really mean it, my friends. Every small shock hits like a punch. This is what an affordability crisis looks like when you actually zoom in. Not just numbers, not CPI, not central banking macroeconomic analysis, not trends, but the stubborn dignity of getting through every single day. Now let's look at the next bit. This text basically tells us the pain has gone national. The promises are familiar. New leaders vowing to bring prices down only to reverse course days after winning. The US president scrambling for answers says our groceries are way down, Trump says, but reality hits actually even harder. Prices for meat, poultry, fish, even non-alcoholic beverages are definitely still climbing. Now, you don't see headlines like this by accident, my friends. They're not just about politics. They're about trust, about the ordinary person, about a public that wants answers and gets only spins and maybe even chest thumping. In moments like this, tension thickens. You can almost hear the country grinding its teeth, waiting for relief that never quite arrives, you know? But then almost jarringly, we cross the border to Canada. Here's the Canadian dollar icon, balanced against the iconic red maple leaf. It's so pretty, right? The headline is almost triumphant, a complete juxtaposition to what we just saw in the US. Canadian dollar posts biggest weekly gain since May as GDP surpasses forecast. Now that's nice, isn't it? What does this mean? In one sense, it's a technical story about currencies and markets. But more interestingly, and in another side of the story, it's actually a signal that while the US dollar weakens and Americans brace for rate cuts, the loonie is rising. Canada's economy is outperforming expectations, fueled by exports, government spending, and a kind of cautious optimism by everyone. It's tempting to assume that this is random, but it's definitely not random. Not in my view anyway. Economic cycles ripple across borders, but right now, Canada is catching an updraft that the US is missing. Very brief diversion from our story here today, my friends. My book, Awake, The Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies, is now out. It's not just about critical thinking, but about reclaiming clarity in a world full of noise. If you're a builder, a leader, or just somebody who wants to think more clearly under pressure, this one is definitely for you. I've also added a 24-minute companion podcast that walks through the key concepts in depth, so if you prefer to listen and reflect, that's now included as well. All the links are down below, including a launch video that goes deeper into these themes. There's also a subscriber discount, so hit that subscribe button and check it out when you're ready. And one more tiny thing before we continue. I'm building a course on AI fluency, as I am a computer scientist with a PhD in this field, for people who want to understand the technology shaping the next decade. If you want to help shape what the course becomes, I've made a very short 8-question quiz. It's literally going to take you like 2 minutes, and your answers will directly decide the content that I build next. The links to everything are below. I'd really love your input, but now let's continue. We just talked about the Canadian dollar and the Canadian economy doing very well, and the fine print actually shows us why this is the case. Canada's economy grew 2.6% in the third quarter, far outpacing forecasts. Oil exports are up, bond yields are steady. There is a sense, maybe just a whisper, that Canada is managing its risk a little bit better this time. Now, of course, none of this happens in a vacuum, right? Every Canadian export, every move in the loonie tugs on the fabric that connects these two economies. As US shoppers feel the punch, Canadian exporters eye new markets like Asia. Tension again, but this time a tension of divergence maybe. But here is a country that you'd only see when a country is feeling the need to future-proof itself. Government of Canada announces investments totaling $6 billion to strengthen Canada's trade and transportation infrastructure. The language here is very calm, almost bureaucratic, and it is. It's literally from the government website. But underneath there is a strategic urgency, right? These investments are not just about roads or rails. They're about Canadian sovereignty, about not being held hostage to the US markets or the next round of tariffs. They're about reaching out, building the corridors that could literally double non-US exports and unlock new prosperity for Canadians. If you're following this from the States or from Europe, ask yourself this: how much of your daily life depends on the hidden infrastructure of trade? When's the last time that you really thought about where your groceries, your minerals, your manufactured goods actually came from? I don't really mean this as a rhetorical question at all. It's literally the world's new fault line. Please put it in the comments down below. Let's have a healthy debate. Now, it's even more interesting here that the quotes from Stephen McKinton and Maninder Sidhu make it very explicit. These investments are smart, strategic commitments to Canada's long-term economic resilience and sovereignty. They are about jobs, yes, but also about the right to chart your own course, right? To think clearly here, you really have to hold two truths at once. Nations are interdependent, and yet each government is haunted by the memory of dependence gone wrong. This is what it looks like when a country tries to build not just prosperity, but independence, right? Now, the next headline snaps us back to the granular reality of sovereignty. Canada's government is reviewing a major merger, Teck and Anglo, on national security grounds. Why is this? Because Teck owns copper and germanium mines, critical minerals in a world where supply chains are basically weapons. The Minister of Industry standing in Parliament reminds us that sovereignty isn't just about GDP or infrastructure, but about who controls the resources under your own soil. Canada has already tightened its foreign investment laws. In a more fractured world, every single deal feels like a test of resolve, right? Tiny little pause. If you made it this far, this is what we do at House of L. We follow the real story through the friction and complexity. If that speaks to you, do consider subscribing. It's not always comfortable, but it is always honest and balanced. And the details here matter, of course, because germanium and copper are not really household words, but they do hold power over your phone, your car, your entire digital life. Canada's government is not just playing defense here, it's literally trying to anticipate the next crisis. The real tension is not just about the markets, but about memory. Who remembers the last supply chain shock? Who's already bracing for the next one, right? And finally, let me just show you a very quick photo that captures the moment itself. The Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney stands with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, a giant flag behind both of them. Of course, super patriotic, but the announcement is basically a rollback of climate regulations in order to attract investments and diversify oil exports. Why is this? Well, the US tariffs, of course, you all know about this by now, imposed by President Trump, are forcing Canada to hedge its bets. Here's the paradox, basically. Canada, often the climate champion, is now making deals to keep its economy afloat in a world where even allies can turn adversarial overnight. We literally have a separate video on this one. Check it out if you're curious. Alberta gets more flexibility here. The federal government gets a commitment to industrial carbon pricing. Tension once more, sure, between ambition and necessity, but again, a huge amount of hope too. But the word that I keep returning to in this entire saga is basically tension and the attempts for balancing. It's not just political or economic anymore, it's personal for the ordinary people. These feelings live in the quiet spaces between certainty and doubt, right? Now, in my view, the real story is not that Canada is winning while America struggles. It's that both these countries are learning, the hard way probably, that no amount of growth or regulation can erase the need for resilience. When I read about American families stretched to the breaking point and then see Canadian officials investing billions to shape a future that's more independent, what I feel is the weight of history, and a quiet pride in Canada. These are decisions that will outlast any headline, any government, any single crisis. So here's my question for you in the audience. In a world built on tension between neighbors, between priorities, between the future we want and the one we get, what does real security look like? Is it control? Is it adaptability? Or is it the courage to hold your ground even when the ground itself is shifting? If you want to dive deeper into these cross-border dynamics, check out these other videos on the US-Canada energy rivalry and the geopolitics of critical minerals. We'll be here tracing the lines where history gets made, and in the end, maybe the tension is not just a fault line. Maybe it's the space where something new, something quietly profound can finally begin. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, if you want to understand how to navigate the noise, the hype, and the complexity of our current moment, I think you'd really enjoy my book. It's called Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies, and it's written for people who want to stay grounded, think clearly, and live in reality, even when the world makes that feel definitely impossible. I've also now included a 24-minute podcast episode where we unpack some of the ideas behind Awake in a more relaxed, conversational way, perfect if you prefer to listen while walking, driving, or just taking a break from screens. You find the link down below. I'd love to know what you think of all of it. As always, thank you so much for being here and for thinking through these questions with me. If you like the conversation, do consider subscribing for more, and don't forget to check out these other videos that I've linked here as a natural next step for a deeper dive.